Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, the project director for for Children of New York shares details on a new report that gives an insight on NYC students who experienced homelessness last year. Then the director of community affairs at Montefiore Einstein speaks on how they helped distribute 70,000 pounds of fresh produce to families in need. After that, we speak with the playwright of The Beautiful Land I Seek to learn more about his recent project. And finally, the CEO of Community Access talks about their mission to help build stable futures for people with mental health concerns. So stay tuned to all this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello, everyone. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today is Tuesday, December 24th. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Data released by Advocates for Children of New York shows that more than 146,000 New York City students experienced homelessness during the 2023 to 24 school year. Of these students, 54% were doubled up or temporarily sharing the housing of others because of a loss of housing or economic hardship. And 41% spent time in New York City shelters. Joining me virtually to discuss these findings is the project director for Advocates for Children of New York, Jennifer Pringle. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I definitely want to talk about student homelessness, but first, can we just talk about or kind of express what it means for a student to be experiencing homelessness?
Yeah. So there is a federal law that defines student homelessness, and it's called the McKinney-Vento Act, and it defines it as those kids who are, for example, living in shelters. It also includes those students who are temporarily staying with someone else because they've lost their housing, because they've been thrown out of their housing, they've been evicted. Um, and are temporarily staying with someone else until they can get their own permanent housing. It also includes students, for example, living on the street or in abandoned buildings. But the two most common situations that we see here in New York City are students who are living in shelter and those who are in those temporary doubled up situations.
Now, how has student homelessness changed over the past decade?
It's a great question because I think there's a lot of attention right now on New York City shelters and the increase in homelessness. But unfortunately, family homelessness has been a long-standing issue in New York City. Last year was the ninth year that there were over 100,000 students in temporary housing. So this is not a new issue here in New York City. It is a stubbornly persistent issue for so many students and their families.
Now, what are some factors that contribute to this finding?
So, the data that we have, it comes from schools who identify students experiencing homelessness. As a part of that identification process, they don't ask why. So we don't have a tremendous amount of insight about why students became homeless. But what we do know from data from the intake process, for example, for the shelter intake process, is that many families are seeking shelter because of, for example, fleeing domestic violence, because of overcrowded housing situations where families are forced to leave. Um, and, but we don't have, based on the data that we have right now, we don't know exactly why these particular students are experiencing homelessness. That said, we all well know that we have housing affordability crisis in the city, and clearly, access to affordable housing, or I should say, the lack of access to affordable housing, is contributing to these numbers.
Now, how does instability in housing impact a child's ability to succeed in school?
So in New York City, about 40% of kids are placed in shelter in a different borough from where they go to school. So that means that so many families are facing these tremendous commutes, and oftentimes parents are put in a position of having to choose between going to housing appointments, doing what they need to do to secure permanent housing, or taking their kids to school with these because of these long commutes. And no family should be put in the position of choosing between permanent housing and attending to their child's education. you know as a result of these long commutes, many kids in temporary housing miss school. And so, one of the things that the city can do is make sure that they're placing families in shelter closer to their children's school. For those families who are placed, far away, also to another issue is that they oftentimes transfer schools. And what we know is that kids who frequently transfer schools have a harder time keeping up with what's going on in the classroom. The school transfer rate for kids in shelter is almost 4 times higher than that for permanently housed students. So if we want to stabilize kids' education, make sure they're regularly going to school, one of the things the city can do is really look at those shelter placements and make sure that they're placing families close to where kids go to school.
Now, what impact is this having on children socially and maybe their development on how they make friends or connect with other children?
Yeah, that's such a great point, because so much of school is about those social connections, and so much about kids thriving in school, thriving academically, has to do with those social connections. So you can just imagine what it's like for a young person who is in temporary housing. This is the third school they've gone to. They may be really reluctant to open themselves up to their peers, to try to develop friendships, because they know they may be fearful this is only going to be temporary for them until they move again. So really increasing school stability, so that kids can stay connected to their peers, stay connected to their teachers, is so, so, so important. And we see that across the research. Kids who have those types of connections to their peers, their teachers, other staff in the school, do better in school. They get better grades. They're less likely to be retained, held back. They're more likely to graduate. So we should be doing all that we can to make sure that kids can have that stable connection. So even though things may be really chaotic outside of school, at least in school, kids can have that stability.
Now, I understand there's something called the Foundation Aid Formula. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what are some of the challenges that arise with this? I understand it hasn't been updated in 15 years. Can you tell me
Yeah.
more?
Yeah. So this is the foundation aid is the main source of funding from the state to school districts. And it's a complicated formula that, our state legislature sets. And the, rules that they use to determine that amount haven't been changed in 15 years. Well, a lot has changed in 15 years, including a significant increase in family homelessness, especially here in New York City. And given that the challenges that we see for many students in temporary housing, as I've mentioned, we strongly think that the state should be including what we call a weight, like an additional funding for districts who are serving students in temporary housing, so that they can make sure that they get those targeted supports for students in temporary housing so that they can thrive in school.
Now, how do staffing shortages in NYC schools exacerbate the difficulties faced by homeless students, and what solutions could address these gaps?
Yeah, so New York City has a students in temporary housing team that is, as you can tell by its name, is focused on supporting students in temporary housing. But there hasn't been a director for that program in over a year. And there are dozens of vacancies within that program, which means that some shelters don't have someone who they can turn to on a regular basis to help with enrollment, to help troubleshoot these transportation issues, to make sure families know what their kids' educational rights are and what kind of options are available to them. So it's so critical that the New York City public schools fill those positions as quickly as possible so that families right now who are experiencing homelessness get the kind of support that they need, so that their kids can be successful in school.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, why is it critical for the city to prioritize education as a way to break the cycle of homelessness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many people don't realize that the number one factor that can help kids today not experience homelessness as adults is education. Kids today who don't get a high school diploma are 4.5 times more likely to experience homelessness as an adult. 4.5 times more likely. So if we want to prevent our young people today, our children and youth who are in shelter today from ever experiencing homelessness again as an adult, we need to concentrate on their education, make sure that they get the services and supports that they need to be successful so that they graduate, pursue whatever they want to after graduation, and become thriving adults.
Now, what can our elected leaders and policymakers do to ensure that this, challenge that so many children in our city are facing is being addressed?
So it's really making it a priority across all the different initiatives. Listen, there's no one solution to supporting students in temporary housing to address all the different things that we've talked about. You really need to come at it from every different side. So it's, looking at transportation and making sure that we really fix up our school transportation system. It's looking at school stability, making sure we have staffing in the shelters who are talking to parents about what the school options are and setting up that transportation, making sure they have Metro cards so that their kids can regularly get to school. Making sure that the shelter system is placing families, is improving the way that they place families so that families don't have to deal with these incredibly long commutes. It's looking at, foundation aid, making sure schools are getting enough funding so that they can provide that additional support, that academic support for students. Helping them out with emergency needs that so many families in temporary housing may have. But without funding, schools have their hands tied. So it's coming at it from all these different angles and making sure it's really a priority that 1 in 8 students in our public schools are experiencing homelessness. 1 in 8. That's just unconscionably high, and we need to make sure our young people get these supports so that they never experience homelessness again.
And quickly, can you just tell us a little bit more about your organization and where people can learn more about this?
Yes, so Advocates for Children of New York, our website, advocatesforchildren.org. We are a nonprofit focused on ensuring that a high quality education for all New York City students who face barriers to academic success, focusing on students from low income backgrounds. So please, I encourage you to come check out our website. You can download the report and read more about it.
Well, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this very important discussion. There's so many things happening in our city, and I think our most vulnerable New Yorkers, which are children, should definitely be highlighted, and we should definitely talk about the challenges they face along with their families. So with that, I want to thank you again for joining us and having this discussion.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care. Bye.
Bye. To find out more about Advocates for Children, please go to their website, which you can find on your screen below. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open after this.
19.7% of Bronxites currently experience food insecurity. Meanwhile, instead of these nice, colorful foods, this is the best food that they have access to. If this sounds like you, there are a bunch of resources to get healthy food for free or cheap. If you want to help, you might consider donating or volunteering in one of these places. Community fridges like this one are all over the city. and allow New Yorkers to conveniently donate extra food to people who might need it. Go to this link and find your nearest one. Food banks and pop-up events like these provide millions of healthy meals to families in need. These organizations are distributing meals to Bronxites as we speak, and are always accepting donations and volunteers.
Welcome back. The Holiday Fresh Produce Distribution Initiative partnered with community-based organizations, faith-based groups, and elected officials to help support those in need. Now in its 5th year, Montefiore Einstein Associates donated and helped distribute 70,000 pounds of fresh produce to families across various locations. Please join me in welcoming the Director of Community Affairs at Montefiore Einstein, Yianna Justo. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Now, how did the idea for the Holiday Fresh Produce Initiative come about, and how has it evolved over the past 5 years?
Absolutely, great question. So the Healthy Holiday Initiative is really the cornerstone of our fresh produce distribution event, and it currently operates under the Community Affairs Department. There were a number of reasons that helped us to kind of initiate this 5 years ago. First, we wanted to highlight and underscore the commitment that we have as a system to building meaningful connections with the community members or between community members and the system. Also, we wanted to bring to light or just kind of address or help to address social determinants of health, in this case, food insecurity. And as we're all familiar, there are a number of turkey distributions that take place in our community. So we wanted to bring something fresh, something new to the table, and what better way than nutritious and high quality produce. So we started, as you mentioned, 5 years ago, and we were just at 1 or 2 sites distributing 10,000 pounds. So 5 years later, we just wrapped up our 2024 efforts, and we covered 8 sites and distributed 70,000 pounds. So we've grown substantially, and we've kind of just been building upon the success of years prior. So absolutely.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about this year's effort and how that event go?
Absolutely. We dealt with some cold weather, as we usually do, some rain, but it went great. Again, we really continue to build upon the success of years prior. This year in particular, we were really proud to introduce 2 new sites. One of them being St. Helena's Church in Parkchester, where we worked with the South Asian community. And then we also partnered with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which is our medical school. Particularly, we worked with the Community Service Learning Program. And it's essentially a curriculum where all incoming medical students are introduced to the communities that they will eventually serve as healthcare providers. So it was really just a full circle moment for them, because some of those community-based organizations that they work with throughout the year were some of the same organizations that came to pick up produce during that distribution day. So this year was just as successful as others, and we accomplished what we set out to do, which was distribute fresh produce and reach as many communities as possible.
Now, I want to highlight once again that your organization or this initiative was able to produce 70,000 pounds of fresh food, which I think is amazing. Can you talk about what that means for the community, especially as we talk about food insecurity, not just during the holidays, but especially, you feel that way a little bit more during the holidays?
Yeah, look, whether or not you celebrate the holidays, in this case, the Thanksgiving holiday, it's always a good time to give back, and it's always a good time to receive. You know, this is just one of the ways in which, again, we really remind people that we are committed to building meaningful connections with them. You know, we extend our care beyond the walls of the hospital. So we don't want to just see you when you're ill. You know, we're also out there. We're also neighbors. We're also community members. And so, you know, again, it feels great to distribute this during the holiday season and really just remind everyone of being grateful, you know?
Now, can you talk about the importance behind the collaboration of community-based organizations, faith groups, and elected officials? And, you know, how does that strengthen the program?
Look, our partners are what make this effort a reality. You know, when they say that it takes a village, it really does take a village. Internally, we coordinate with our departments, right? There's a lot of logistics involved, a lot of planning involved. So a lot of our associates, a lot of our internal departments really step up to the plate and help us get this done. Our hosting sites welcome us and provide us the room really to engage with our audiences in a way that we usually or for the most part don't get to do. And then our partnerships with elected officials really help us to ensure that the program reaches those who need it the most.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the Westchester Produce and, you know, what role they play in the program?
Absolutely. Westchester Produce, you know, they're a locally owned company, family-owned company, and really without them, there would be no fresh produce distribution. You know, Mike and his team really understand what it means to us to pack not only quality produce, but culturally sensitive ones. And so they really truly understand that. They've been with us since the beginning of the program. And every single distribution that we have, the produce is picked up the day of, that morning. So Mike and his team are at the market at 4 or 5 in the morning for a delivery of 7 to 8 in the morning every single day that initiative takes place. So without Westchester Produce, you know, it allows us to support local. It allows us to work with people that just get it. And really, without Westchester Produce, we wouldn't have a produce distribution.
Now, you briefly mentioned it, but I want to talk about it again because I think when we talk about food in the Bronx, we have to talk about the culturally rich, you know, recipes that, you know, people in our community create. So I understand that plantains, yuca, bok choy, those are all things that are going to be included. You know, can you talk about the importance of just incorporating these cultural, you know, ingredients so that people feel a little bit of home when they're, you know, going to pick up this food?
Look, when we're planning this, you know, we start very early on. Springtime, I mean, we just wrapped up. We're about to start planning next year's. So when we sit down to strategize and think about these things, we really try to envision ourselves as the people who are receiving this, because at one point or another, we ourselves, you know, have been participants, we've been recipients ourselves, but we really try to relate and let people know that we respect their values, we respect their customs, we respect their traditions. So once we're planning, once we're sitting there, we really want to think about the experience entirely. The quality of the bags that we're using, the quality of the produce, and again, just culturally sensitive items that they'll enjoy and that they know how to prepare.
Now, I understand there are also multilingual recipe cards. Can you tell me, you know, what the feedback has been like from people who are able to receive them?
You know, again, that kind of speaks to people feeling like we're thinking of them. You know, the recipes, for the last 2 years, we've worked with nutrition experts at Montefiore Einstein to put these recipes together. So we more or less know ahead of time what we're going to get or what we're able to provide in terms of the produce. And so using that information, we build these recipes. You know, this year we had a QR code. It kind of directed folks to a landing page. They were able to see the recipes in multiple languages. And so it's always a really positive thing. I think that, again, people really feel thought of and appreciated when they see so much detail go into this initiative.
Now, leaders like Marcos Crespo have mentioned that inadequate access to healthy food affects childhood development, but also chronic disease management. Can you elaborate on how this initiative supports preventative health care?
Absolutely. You know, preventative care is the best care. And initiatives like this really just help us to highlight the issue at hand. You know, while we understand that we're not necessarily solving the issue, I think that introducing folks to healthy food options, quality food options, eventually create habits. You know, a healthy diet is part of your short-term and your long-term care. And so, you know, initiatives like this really kind of just help expose people and kind of allow them to enjoy, you know, food that they will find otherwise, but in a very much different way. So we try to really bring health to the people. It's not really just about celebrating the holiday, but really meeting people where they are.
Now, as you look to the future, as we mentioned, it's been 5 years. What do you hope to see for the future of that? Or, you know, do you hope that the program is able to expand in any way?
Look, we're always open to expanding. We're always open to bring in new ideas. You know, there's always room for improvement and innovation. And for example, this year, cooking classes or demonstrations using those items that we distributed wasn't our radar. We couldn't get to do it, but it's something that we're looking to do. So, you know, we're always challenging ourselves to bring in new ideas, new partners, new locations, new sites, and really to allow ourselves to reach more people as much as we can.
Which I think would be amazing, and I'm definitely looking forward to that, because I think it's one thing to give people healthy food, but you definitely have to show them how they can make it taste really good.
Absolutely.
So I think that would be really exciting.
Absolutely.
Now, how can other people, whether that's individuals, businesses, or just other community organizations, get involved or contribute to this initiative?
Look, as we've grown, logistics, planning, you know, it's vast, it's grand. It really does take a village. It takes an army. And, you know, we're always open to ideas, as I mentioned. And a lot of ideas, you know, a lot of people approach us with ideas or suggestions or partnerships. And so we treat that on a case by case basis. But really the way in which that anyone can immediately help us really support this is just by spreading the word. Again, healthcare extends beyond the walls of the hospital. And so really talking about it and considering Montefiore Einstein as a partner, as a neighbor, rather than just, you know, the place that you visit when you're ill is really the way in which, you know, anyone can help to support this.
Now, considering your role, how has this initiative shaped your perspective on the power of community-driven solutions to food insecurity?
Look, we can't do this alone. Every contributor, from the local print shop that prints the recipe cards, from, you know, our Westchester Produce partners to our hosting sites, when you are at the event, when you're packing those bags, when CBOs are picking up those bags, something happens. You know, the sense of gratitude that you feel, the sense of joy, the sense of pride, knowing that some of our associates are also neighbors, are also community members. That's really when you see the power of unity and the power of numbers come together. And we really try to leverage that. You know, again, we're committed to building these meaningful connections, and really all of this really just serves as a way for us to help create that bond. Not to just check off a box, but really build long-lasting partnerships and relationships with everyone who touches the initiative.
Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This was a very important discussion. I know that in the work that I've been doing, I've been hearing food insecurity pop up a lot, and I think it's amazing to see organizations do what they can to help assist with the problem we're having now, but, you know, solutions that could help us in the future. So thank you so much for joining us.
Maybe you can help us volunteer next year.
Oh, of course, of course.
You're invited.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To keep up with all the amazing work Montefiore does, please follow them on Instagram at Montefiore Health System. Stay tuned, we have more for you right after this.
Hey, creative family, my name is Timothy Coleman, and I'm the Director of Education here at BronxNet. And I'm standing in BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx, because I want to let you know about an amazing program that we're bringing back that highlights the creativity of community members just like you. Emerging Media Makers is a show that introduces you to BronxNet's certified producers. They've taken a step in their creative journey by enrolling in BronxNet's media training classes. On this show, you'll get to see the many ways that our certified producers have created a space that's all their own. Emerging Media Makers, your passion lives here.
Set in 1950, The Beautiful Land I Seek follows two determined Puerto Rican revolutionaries on a train from New York to Washington, D.C., as they discuss their plan to strike in the name of Puerto Rican independence. The play is on a limited run through December 29, 2024 at the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. Playwright Matt Barbo joins us now to tell us more. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into the play, can you tell me a little bit more about you? I'm always curious to know, about people who, kind of work in this field and what kind of started them on that journey. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
I grew up here in New York City. I've lived in Brooklyn my whole life, and I started doing theater when I was in high school, which I think is true for a lot of people. I started acting. I auditioned for, the fall play one year, and stuck with it. And it really, it followed me through to college, and eventually. I made the transition into writing because I finally wrote something without a role for myself in it and realized I was having a lot more fun that way. And so I've been writing plays ever since, and I'm excited to bring this one.
Now, what I love is that there's definitely, like we talk about, just the presence of Puerto Rico and, the two Puerto Rican revolutionaries being in the play. I'm always curious to know what inspired people to kind of use that real life background and kind of like put it in their work and their artwork. So can you explain what inspired you to kind of go on that path when we talk about playwriting?
Absolutely. A big reason I sort of transitioned into playwriting to begin with was just that I noticed there weren't a lot of roles and stories for people like me at the time being told on stage. That's changed. There's been a lot of sort of great progress on that front. I know that you've had playwrights Nelson Diaz-Mercano and Kristen Cato on the show before, who are wonderful and friends of mine. But for this particular story, I first learned about the historical event behind it, where Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola traveled to Washington, D.C. To attempt to assassinate President Truman, probably about 15 years ago. And I think one of the things that was really fascinating to me about it was how little I knew about it, and how little I heard about any of that in school. And I knew a little bit about some of the events that happened a couple of years later with Lolita Lebron, storming Congress. And so it stuck with me for a long time, and I knew they took the train, and that seemed like a good, way in. And I didn't really know what to do with it until Hurricane Maria, until the unrest around Hurricane Maria, around feelings around the U.S.'s response. My own grandmother was displaced and passed away here in the United States instead of at home. And so there was a lot of, I think, feelings of suddenly like seeing this moment in a broad historical context that inspired me to like sit down and write a play that didn't just contend with this one moment, but winds up folding in a lot of history and a lot of art and a lot of other discussions about the U.S.'s relationship to Puerto Rico.
And with that, I want to talk about the title, The Beautiful Land I Seek, the juxtaposition between the title and then, what we hear that's going on in the play. Can you talk about what kind of inspired the title itself and, overall tell us a little bit more about the play as well?
Absolutely, yeah. The title actually comes from the Puerto Rican national anthem, La Borinqueña. The current version of it includes a line where that is how Columbus is said to have spoken of Puerto Rico when he landed on the shore. This is the beautiful land I seek, esta es la linda tierra que busco yo. And that struck me as really interesting, I think both because it's very complex. I think in thinking about our historical relationship to Christopher Columbus as a figure, as well as the idea of seeking better for a country and for a land, and the idea of sort of striving for something more beautiful out of life. And so I was really sort of struck by that image of what does it mean to seek a beautiful land. Columbus, obviously, like, an explorer, and then to these two revolutionaries who are also sort of seeking a beauty for their land in a different way.
Now, I also want to talk a little bit more about the characters. Can you give us a little bit of a background without giving too much away?
Sure, yeah. Well, the two main characters are Oscar and Grease, who are two Puerto Rican revolutionaries operating out of New York City, who are on the train to Washington, D.C. With this plan that they're going to assassinate President Truman. And they are resolved to die in the effort. As the train sort of progresses and they're waiting, basically, they're stuck on the train waiting, they begin to get into discussions about the intricacies of their plan and whether or not it will make a difference. And as they're having these discussions, they learn that the lock on their compartment is broken, and they begin to sort of be visited by figures from throughout history and art, including characters like Christopher Columbus, like Maria from West Side Story, by President Truman himself, because I wanted to sort of like find ways to sort of have these conversations and explore like the full breadth of history here. And so, the actors, I think, are doing a really phenomenal job, sort of inhabiting those roles, because it is, we have our two main, we have Bobby Roman and Alejandro Hernandez in the roles of Oscar and Grease, but also, Danny Colon and Ashley Marie Ortiz playing everyone else. And so it's been really an honor to have such hardworking actors, throwing on new costumes, coming out, interpreting different people. It's been really cool. It's been a really cool experience to work on that as well. And of course, Nate Betancourt appears as a character known as the writer, who is maybe more than a little autobiographical, but yeah.
Now, can you just explain what are some of the themes that people can expect to see when they go in to watch the play?
Sure. It's there's a lot going on in it, as you might have been able to tell from that list of characters. But I think largely it's a play that I hope, with lots of humor and sincerity, deals with questions of human dignity, of the ways that people can be driven to desperation, but I hope it also contains glimmers of hope. I hope people come to see it and leave knowing something more about this particular history than they came in with. I never want audience members to feel like they had to do homework or cram beforehand, right. Because and the fact that it's a little known history is definitely part of the play. I would say another theme is probably this idea of like what are we taught about American history and what aren't we? But I do hope people leave curious. I think one of my favorite responses to the play is I didn't know that. My second favorite response is I didn't know it was going to be funny. So, yeah.
Now, with that, where can people go to see the play, and how long is it going on for?
Absolutely. So the play is, our final performance is the 29th. We have a few days off around the holidays. And the play is going up at the historic Puerto Rican Traveling Theater at 47th Street and around between 8th and 9th Avenues. It's a landmark converted firehouse, which was made into a theater by Miriam Colon, and it's really an honor to be on that stage, to be working in a space where Raul Julia worked, where famous Latin playwrights came together to create new work, So I'm excited to be there, and I'd love to share the space with other people too.
Now, what I think is super exciting is that you kind of, throughout your story, you know, expressed that you had interest in, you know, acting, and then it kind of transformed into writing. I'm curious to know, are there any other areas that you want to get into or that you have gotten into?
I mean, something that I really love about theater is how collaborative it is. So I love being in a room and working working very closely with actors and with directors. I think, and I think that we all have to do a lot of things. So I'm glad that this play is being directed by a longtime collaborator of mine, Jose Sayas, who I think is a wonderful dramaturg, which means that he's kind of like a mechanic. He really knows how to, like, what makes a play work, and he's and so this play has developed so much under his care. You know, I'd love to. I think doing what he does is pretty cool. I'd love to maybe direct something someday, or, you know, I've directed little things here and there, but not at quite at his level. Yeah, I think that's very fun. But I do think that everyone in theater sort of does a little bit of everything, and something that's been so great about working with this cast for so long is that. You know, everybody's contributing so much. So, you know, rather than just having a couple of weeks of rehearsal and getting it up on its feet and feeling that rush, we're really able to deepen and explore. So actors are talking to me about the script and the writing, and you know, I'm offering insights into the directing, and Jose obviously putting pressure on the script. With this company, I think we've all sort of like deepened our practice and our craft, and have been stretching beyond our boundaries a little bit in exciting ways. So I hope we all expand into other roles as the years come by.
Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit of your creation with us here at BronxNet. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For tickets to the play, please go to the website that you see on your screen below. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Open after this.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. %5 of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. %34 of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
Welcome back. Each year, millions of Americans living with mental health concerns face barriers to accessing and maintaining stable housing. While there are various causes for mental health challenges, there is evidence that the accessibility of stable and affordable housing can improve mental health. The CEO of Community Access, Cal Hedigan, joins me in studio to speak on how their team is at the forefront of this issue. Cal, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about Community Access's history and work?
Certainly. Very happy to. Community Access was founded in 1974 by family members and mental health providers associated with Manhattan Psychiatric Center, who really understood the critical need for there to be housing with support in the community when people were leaving institutions like MPC. And to begin with, the early board members pooled $800 to rent 300 apartments, three apartments in the East Village. And so that's what happened in 1974. And today we operate over 1,700 units of supportive and affordable housing across New York City, as well as providing a number of other services, all geared towards helping people living with mental health concerns to thrive in the community and outside of institutions.
Now, as many of us know, the homelessness crisis in New York City has been a long time issue for the many residents living here. You know, what has that been like for your organization, and what are some challenges that go with that?
The need for more housing and how much of a long-term commitment it is to really create all the affordable and supportive housing that New York City needs for the tens of thousands of people and families who are currently trying to survive in a shelter system.
Now, I understand that one of the main values of community access is the right of all individuals to create their own lives. How does this value impact your thoughts regarding supportive housing?
It really is a guide to how we work, that we are not the people with all the answers. The people with the answers are the people who come to us for services. And our job is really to deeply listen to them, to understand what they want, what they need, to equally to understand what they've experienced that has not been helpful, and to be an ally on a journey that they determine for themselves.
Now, it's been about a year since Community Access opened its doors to residents at its River Avenue apartments. Can you tell me a little bit more about that development?
I can. It opened last November, in November of 2023, and it's a supportive and affordable housing building which does now house 245 households, both a mix of people living with mental health concerns who have experienced homelessness, families who've also experienced chronic homelessness, and then supportive, affordable housing for anyone who was lucky enough to win the lottery and get an apartment in the building. So it's like all of our housing, it's integrated. It's mixing people living with mental health concerns and straight affordable housing. And there's a service team that works on site there to connect people to services in the community, help people identify goals that they want to work on, and being that ally that I mentioned before in supporting people in their journeys.
Now, expanding on that effort, I understand that there are plans to accelerate housing development in the next few years. Can you tell me a little bit more about those plans and why it's important for New York City?
Yes, as you mentioned, the housing crisis in New York City is not going away. And so we have made a strategic commitment to really double our portfolio of housing. So to move from where we were a couple of years ago, where we were in the pipeline getting towards 2,000, and now we want to have a pipeline that will end up with us having 4,000 units of supportive and affordable housing. So for us, that's, housing isn't everything, but it's such a foundational need for people to have safe and secure place to lay their head at night, so that they can look towards other things that they might want in their lives beyond basic survival.
And I want to talk about with that, some of those other things could be employment. Can you talk about the workforce training program that you guys have, and how that's helping the people that you serve?
Yes, our Howie the Harp Peer Advocacy and Training Program was established in 1995, so we have a long track record. And is a place where people who have been users of mental health services can go to learn the skills to become peer specialists and work in the human services sector. So we've graduated thousands of people into the human services workforce in New York City in these, how many decades? Three decades of doing the training.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the Crisis Respite Center in the East Village and the work that you do there?
Yes, our Crisis Respite Center opened in 2013, and what it is it's an alternative to psychiatric hospitalization for people who are experiencing a psychiatric crisis, and it's almost entirely peer staffed, that is staffed with people who have lived experience themselves with mental health concerns, and it really supports people in a very warm and home-like environment to help them navigate the crisis that they're experiencing without being on a locked ward in an institution.
And with that, we're hearing so many amazing things the organization has been doing just recently, but I would love to take it back a moment and just talk about the things that you've done in the past to help, New Yorkers. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization and the work, or, some of the milestones that they've reached in the past?
Yes, as I mentioned, we've started very, very small with those 3 apartments in the East Village. Early on, I think the organization became known for really being very grounded in a set of values that include human rights, healing and recovery being possible for each one of us, and the importance of having peers or people with lived experience being part of the design and the delivery of services. So our positioning of ourselves in really standing for the human rights of people who are living with mental health concerns and often subject to discrimination and coercion in the mental health system is something that has sort of built throughout our history. We have a very strong advocacy department, and we founded the Correct Crisis Intervention Today Coalition, which is a coalition of service users and providers who are fighting to change how New York City responds to people in crisis and to move law enforcement out of crisis response and move the city towards a health response for people in crisis.
Now, I understand there's something called the compliance program. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Our internal compliance program at Community Access.
Oh, yeah. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, or is that something that you can't speak on?
Oh, no, I mean, I can. I was just
okay.
taken aback. I mean, we have, as any organization of our size, where we bill Medicaid for some of our services in our residential programs, we have a robust sort of internal department that ensures the quality of our services and, sort of is a internal quality assurance and quality improvement part of what we do.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about just the stigma that's associated with mental health and, how it's been challenging for people who are experiencing mental health, as you mentioned, to get housing. Can you explain what some of those challenges were, for somebody who may be looking for housing while they're dealing with, any challenges with mental health?
I think one of the ways that stigma, and for me, stigma goes hand in hand with discrimination. The way it can operate in cities like New York City or any place is where people are not welcoming of the creation of programs to support people and might have a lot of misconceptions about the fact that we're all like living with the same struggles in a way. So in terms of sometimes the fact that our system is very, very hard to navigate unless you've been working in it for, like I have, for 30 years, if you're new to the experience of homelessness or new to the experience of living with a mental health concern, sometimes you just don't know where to go, or who can provide you with access to the resources that you need to move out of your current dilemma.
Now, I also want to talk about how the way as a society we view mental health has transformed and evolved, over, I would say, even the last decade. Can you talk about how you've seen that in the work that you do?
Yes, when I first started doing this work, there was not enough talk about the possibility of healing and recovery. It was almost an idea that you were identified as having a psychiatric diagnosis and your life was over, or your life was somehow going to be smaller or limited and you couldn't live a full and meaningful life. And I think there's been an awful lot of movement forward to really understanding that living with a mental health concern doesn't mean that you don't get to have dreams, that you cannot be a contributor to society.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I thought that was really beautiful, and I definitely admit that it did seem that way, just even growing up and how we talked about people with mental health. I definitely saw that, so thank you so much for sharing that and showing that there is, a more positive future for anybody who may be struggling with that. Now, with that, what do you hope for the legacy of community access, and what do you hope that legacy will look like in the future?
I think community access is and will continue to be a real beacon for a human rights-based approach to serving people living with mental health concerns, and a voice against coercion, and a voice against sort of a narrow understanding of the kind of supports that people need when they're navigating the human condition.
Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. I know it's something a lot of people here in our city are constantly thinking about. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
To find out more about the amazing programs and the services they offer, visit their website at communityaccess.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you miss any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours a happy holidays. See you next time.